The New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. Let's bring in foreign policy commentator Collins Swege. He joins us from Brussels. Good morning, Collins, and welcome to the program. Saw you earlier taking a sip of your coffee. I want to begin with your thoughts on the ceasefire that's been announced by the Russian government this morning, and how this humanitarian aspect of the war could be further explored for peaceful resolution. There have been reports, though, the Russian missiles are firing indiscriminately and civilians have been caught in it. Some have also said that this is how Putin operates. He may not win the war, like you said yesterday, but he goes on until there's a huge loss of lives before he stops.
Yeah, well, thank you, Marachi, and good morning. Good morning to your viewers. Well, obviously, I think for quite a while, the world should be poised to seeing this cat and mouse, coming from the Russian leader. I mean, we won't be hearing of purported ceasefire for the first time. One was supposed to have been in place yesterday. They were supposed to have created a humanitarian corridor. That was agreed about 48 hours. Well, it was supposed to go in force some 48 hours ago. Who was the one that actually broke it? That was Russia. And so the humanitarian toll continued to rise. Well, we can only hope that the new announcement of a ceasefire by Russia themselves will now hold, because the toll on humans, we have seen a picture from channels about, on old men and women, not good in the foot, actually, struggling to trek from one point to the other. We've seen children crying, families, disintegrated. The human toll is just too much, and one can only hope that, the human mind, the human face will return back to the Russian leader, at least to see through this, ceasefire that he has announced. But one thing is very clear, and I think no mistake should be made about that. The Russian leader has a goal, and that goal is actually destabilizing Ukraine, changing the government to one that will be answerable to him, and completely disregarding Ukrainian sovereignty. And I think he's going to continue until he achieves that goal. The ceasefire announced probably is for a very, very short time, because the demand that he has put on the table, the two major ones, non-compliance or non-joining of EU, and then ceasing of NATO activities in Ukraine, ruling out that they will ever be members. Those are two serious issues that had been made clear to him that they are not going to happen. So he keeps hammering on them, and so we'll see how all this plays out in the coming hours, not even days.
Yeah, but isn't this the point, though, for the Russian president and the Russian forces who are in Ukraine? The death toll, the civilian death toll, the body count at the end of the day, that's how they win the war, right? I mean, if the civilians are out of there, then how do you measure the impact of this war in Ukraine?
Well, the impact is going to be measured first and foremost on the toll on civilians. That's one. Now, we have heard excuses of civilian targets, that's the civilian buildings being targeted as a result of some military, Ukrainian military equipment being hidden in those buildings, and that was the reason given by Putin for targeting those those facilities. Well, we do know that there is no clean war. That's number one, and that is why people always say that diplomacy should be applied. And then secondly, we know that misinformation on both sides is always a tool in warfare. So it is difficult to measure who is actually telling the truth here. But at the end of the day, Marachi, when the history of all of this is written, say 20, 50 years to come, it is the toll on humanitarian, on civilians that is going to actually stand above any other thing, that will happen.
Yeah, indeed. And civilian lives are more important than anything else in this war. But talking about civilian lives, the impacts, of these sanctions that have been imposed on Russia, how far-reaching could they be? Because I know that when countries impose sanctions or when organizations and, there's multilateral organizations, multilateral organizations, beg your pardon, when they impose sanctions, they're very careful about, it not being too tough, especially for civilians to be able to cope in those countries, right? So how far-reaching can, these sanctions go? How difficult can they be for people living in Russia? I mean, they're already almost cut off from the rest of the world. International news media has already pulled out. International corporations have pulled out as well. So they're really on their own right now.
They are on their own indeed. You are right about that. And the world has never been, so united as they have been on, this particular conflict, Ukrainian-Russian conflict, united against a single country, which is Russia. Yes, there is absolutely no doubt about the fact that any sanction anywhere affects, the man on the street. Russia is certainly not going to be, an exception. One can only hope that, and in fact, there are indications that what the United States and the transatlantic partners are doing is actually leaving the last bullet to be fired, in the long run. So this is why the sanction regime that they have put in place is a kind of phased out one. Because the main one, which is oil, the most potent finance tool for Russia, has been left out of it. That is not a coincidence. I think the reason is strategic. It's strategic because as we speak, I think efforts are made to beef up global supply of natural gas and oil, such that once the plug is finally pulled on Russian oil, the impact on civilians, both out here in Europe, where already energy prices were rising before this catastrophe, it is meant to rise more. Even United, we have seen them be also in Europe, where the Greens are actually ones that have been, clamoring for the closure of, nuclear plants and, transition to natural energy. Now, there are negotiations to actually rescind those closures to allow them open for a much longer period to be able to break the independence on Russian oil. So the calculation is that when all of this happens and they begin to affect the common man in Russia, which is inevitable, they will then revolt against the government, and that is one form of one strategy for targeting regime change. So ultimately, it is going to affect humans. They remain, civilians remain the last people in the room when war happens, and then it affects them in a very significant way.
Collins, thank you again for joining us on the program. Always love your analysis. We have so much more to talk about in this war as it develops, especially as we expect those Nigerians in Sumy to be evacuated soon. We understand that efforts have been delayed just a bit. We'll be getting details on that in a moment. Thank you again, Collins, for joining us on the program.
Always a pleasure, Amarachi. Have a great day. Cheers.